stay forever. Bill Monroe and his wife Rose were finishing their dessert one Wednesday evening. They sat at the kitchen table, their usual spot now that their twin sons were away at college. The weather in Virginia was lovely this time of year, still warm enough for outdoor activities, but the heat was easing up a bit. Bill felt good when Rose said, "I'm bored." He looked at her and asked, "How about going to a movie?" They hadn't been to a theater since the pandemic began, but now the cinemas were open again. She gave a small smile. "I didn't mean just now. I meant with our life." She looked playfully at him. He recognized that playful tone. "Maybe we should meet new people." Rose looked at him sharply. "You're joking." "Yep." "I wasn't joking. That was my idea. It's not a joke." Bill studied her face again. That smile, but there was something more serious. "Maybe you need to clarify if you're being serious." Both of them were lawyers. Rose had her own firm that mainly handled family law, which mostly meant divorce cases. Bill worked at a firm in D.C. focusing on business crimes. Before that, he had done various types of criminal defense, so they could communicate clearly when they wanted to, or, like Rose had just done, they could be a bit vague. Rose said, "We've been exclusive for 23 years. They were both 44 years old. And now you want something different?" Bill felt a bit annoyed, and his voice showed it. "I want to try something new. With other people?" "Yes." "That's a big change." This was more a statement than a question. "Yes." Rose met his gaze confidently, her posture firm, just like she did in meetings. Bill continued to look at her, nodding as he understood what she was saying. He asked, "So, what are you proposing?" "I want to see other men, but still stay married. No divorce, no separation, just some extra connections, if you understand." Bill was silent, still focused on her. Their eye contact felt long, though it lasted less than 2 minutes. Then he stood up and walked to the back patio. Rose watched him, thinking he would stop at the pool, but he didn't. He walked right past it and through the back gate at a steady pace. Rose had not expected that. She thought there would be an argument, some anger. It bothered her that he didn't show any emotion at all. It felt more like a business discussion. She had wanted to start serious, but then ease into it, but he remained calm. That was unsettling. She had mentally prepared for this talk, as if she were getting ready for a court case. She had prepared her reasons and tried to guess how he would respond, but he had caught her off guard. She really did not want to end the marriage, yet it felt like that was becoming more likely. Bill felt deeply unsettled. He had learned to hide such feelings well, but he knew he couldn't keep it up for long, so he walked away. He wore shorts and a t-shirt with sneakers, and he took his keys and wallet with him. He found himself walking over the 14th Street Bridge into Washington, D.C. An hour later, he arrived at his office building. It was about 8:20 and getting dark. Some workers were still there, but not many. As he walked, Bill cleared his mind. This was a technique he had practiced to let his thoughts come to the surface. Now that he was in his office, it was time to reflect. While walking, he thought mostly about his life with Rose and the twins, but other memories surfaced too. He recalled Rose dancing with a younger colleague at her holiday party the year before. He remembered a 4th of July picnic when she had disappeared for a while. Their beach vacation was another memory. Rose wore a smaller swimsuit and looked great, drawing attention from others. He had felt proud then. Now, as he sat in his office, silent tears fell from his eyes. He struggled to breathe. Bill was a tall man with a medium build. He had sandy hair, brown eyes, and strong legs. He had been loyal to Rose throughout their marriage, even when he had opportunities to cheat. Until that night, he thought Rose had been loyal too. Rose was also tall, with a slim figure and a pretty face, often framed by her messy dark brown hair. She looked much younger than she actually was. Bill guessed she might have had her chances too. He wondered if perhaps something had pushed her to bring up the idea of change that evening. Did she have someone else in mind? As he thought it over, he felt she might have been thinking about another man when she made her suggestion. He concluded a few things. First, Rose seemed unhappy in some way with their life together, possibly in their intimacy. Second, she would likely try to change things and wouldn't be easily swayed by small adjustments. Third, it seemed likely that she might be open to being with another man. Fourth, He thought it was unlikely that she had already done so. He needed to figure out what he wanted in this situation. It was clear to him that his ideal scenario would be for none of this to have happened. He believed she was suggesting an open marriage where both of them could explore other options. If she wasn't, then their marriage would likely end, and she must have known that. So, an open marriage? He began to think about what he might do if that situation came to be. There were two women he found interesting. One was younger and single, Mary Clifford, a fellow volunteer at a food bank where he helped twice a month. He sensed that she liked him, even though he was married. The other was Nora Stanton, another lawyer at his firm. She was divorced and around his age. He always thought she would be open to his advances, especially if he mentioned that his marriage had changed. He was sure there were other women who might be interested in him too. However, it seemed there were many men who would gladly seek attention from Rose, his wife. There were likely more of them than women for him. He decided to find out more about Rose's feelings without directly asking her. He wondered if there was someone specific she had in mind. While thinking this over, he stood up to head to the restroom down the hall. As he passed by George Bailey's office, he heard George mention, "Rosie?" Bill paused, just out of sight, hearing George say, "What did he say?" There were pauses and whispers until George finally replied, "I can check to see. I'll be right back." Bill realized George was about to check if he was in the office and hurried back to his own space to wait. Sure enough, George popped his head into Bill's office. He asked, "Bill, why are you here so late?" George was a younger man, around 34, unmarried and fairly large with a blonde ponytail. He'd recently become a partner at the firm, but Bill had never supported that decision. He found George distracting, especially since George had dated two women in the office, and now it looked like he had an eye on Rose as well. Bill replied casually, "Just some work to finish up." George nodded and asked, "Is something bothering you, Bill? You look uneasy." Bill knew he didn't look uneasy, but George was not very good at hiding his feelings. Bill replied, "Not at all, George, but you seem a bit off. What's up?" It was true. George did look a bit anxious. Bill realized it was likely because everyone at the firm knew he kept a gun locked in his desk drawer. He had done that for safety after a client had acted aggressively during a meeting. Bill suspected George was worried about him. Bill smiled and subtly moved his hand from the desk to his side. George said, "I think I've just been working too hard," then retreated down the hall to his office, closing the door behind him. Once alone, Bill opened the drawer where his gun was stored. He checked it and stood up, tucking it into the front of his clothes. His t-shirt covered it, but anyone glancing his way might notice something there. He walked around the office and noticed that only he and George were there now. He approached George's door, which was unlocked, and stepped inside. George looked at him and said, "It's nothing, Bill. Nothing's wrong." "Oh? It seems to me you're not telling the truth. You knew what she was going to say today." "We talked. I mean, there is a feeling between us, but what, George? When you say nothing, do you just mean you're not together? What did happen? Please don't lie, George. You're not good at it." George was quiet for a moment before he said, "We had lunch together. We met at a dance once, just danced, maybe some light kisses. And now you want to get involved with her? I've always wanted that. Most guys would. You want to be with Nora. Now you have a chance." "George, I'll say this once. You cannot have anything to do with Rose. She is not for you. No more lunches, no dancing, no calls or texts, got it? No, I won't accept that. She and I have something special. You have to move on. Go after Nora. I have many ways to respond to you, George, and they wouldn't be kind." George pulled back, his eyes darting to Bill. But he said, "We have security cameras, Bill. You wouldn't get away with anything. Maybe I don't care." He revealed something from his side. George seemed taken aback and pressed against the wall. He said, "Okay, I promise not to see her again." Bill thought George was terrible and felt like he could end it all right then. But he didn't want to face the consequences, and he knew Rose would just find someone else. Bill laughed at George. He said, "I won't harm you now, George, but if I went to the other partners and told them you were pursuing my wife, they would get rid of you fast. Actually, that might happen anyway." I said, "Okay, no more contact." Bill nodded. He warned, If you're lying and I find out, one day you'll be walking along and it would not be good for you. And this will still be safely tucked away in my drawer, you understand? Yes, you're terrible. And cruel, too. Now that's a smart plan. He put away what he had and left the building. It was about 9:30 p.m. He took a cab home. Bill entered his house to see what Rose was doing. He also wanted to grab some things in case he decided to leave. His car, for example. It was just a Civic, but he needed a way to get around and liked it. He arrived home right before 10. Rose was cleaning the living room. It was something she did. Max. Bill clapped his hands loudly to get her attention. He waved her into the kitchen. The vacuum stopped, and she followed him to the table where they had sat earlier. They sat down, and Bill said, "You can't have George. He won't be answering your calls. Are you out of your mind? He's a partner in my firm." Usual arguments. The tension between them had been growing for some time. "You're such a jerk, Bill," Rose said, her voice shaking slightly. Bill smirked. "After what you did with him?" Rose's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "What are you talking about? We barely did anything." "Sure, but it was enough. What were you planning exactly?" Bill asked. Rose crossed her. "Other men. You could be with other women if that's what you want." Shook his head. "You went out with him, Rose. You weren't exactly careful. It wasn't in a place where anyone would recognize us. You had to know that once I found out, I wouldn't just let it go. You crossed a line, Rose." Rose sighed, defeated. "One thing I was going to suggest is that we don't talk about any of it." He would have bragged at work, and you know I would have ended things. "Well," Rose said, her voice dropping, "can't we just have some fun on the side? I'm tired of this." "I don't know. Even if I went along with it, it would probably be the end of us. And keep going with our marriage. Are you really that unhappy?" Bill asked quietly. Rose hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I'm sorry, but yes." Bill frowned. "I thought we were doing okay. We're together more now. We're intimate. Isn't it good?" Rose shook her head. "It's fine, but it..." "Do you really think I could just be casual about this?" Bill asked. "What do you think would happen if I got involved with someone else?" Rose stayed quiet for a moment, her hands nervously fidgeting. "That woman, Nora," she muttered. Bill shrugged. "What do you think would happen? You'd end up with her, or someone else younger who's interested in you? But you wouldn't end up with him, Rose. You were just looking for something exciting. We're different like that." Rose stood up, her face troubled. She went upstairs without saying another word. Bill heard the sound of the shower running. He decided to give her space and went to shower by the pool house. Later, Bill returned to the house and climbed into bed. Rose was already lying there, her back turned to him. He thought about everything that had happened and how much had changed between them. Even after all this time, part of him still cared for her deeply. They lay there in silence, lost in their own thoughts as the weight of their conversation hung in the air. They were starting to drift off to sleep when she said, "That was nice, thank you. But things still won't change." "I know, it's tough, Rose. It doesn't have to be tough. We'll see. I have some choices to make. Please don't hide anything from me." "Okay." Eventually, they fell asleep. On Thursday, Rose went to work like she always did. Bill called his support group to let them know he would be late. He didn't have any meetings scheduled. He looked up the divorce laws in their state and found out that if they split, there wouldn't be any spousal support, and they would need to settle who would keep the house. It was likely that he would buy her out. Finances wouldn't be a huge issue for him, but he worried about how it would affect their boys. Their parents were all alive and well, and none of them would be happy about a split. But they also wouldn't understand an open marriage, and he felt they would eventually find out. Worse still, they would have to live apart for 6 months with no physical connection. He started to write an email to their parents and saved it as a draft for later. He knew he would have to call the boys to break the news. He'd decide when, but he felt it should be sooner rather than later. If Rose was going to make changes, she should face the full reality of it. Then he sat and wondered if he could stay with Rose if they both started seeing other people. He knew other couples did that. He opened the internet and did some research. After 2.5 hours, he decided that the idea of an open marriage didn't make sense to him. He felt that all of this research was just a way to distract himself. Deep down, he knew he couldn't go through with it. Maybe if they had been younger or hadn't been exclusive for so long, it might have worked. Or if they were very close with another couple, maybe multiple relationships could be managed. But then again, maybe not. All of this thinking only made him more certain that his marriage was over. He opened a document on his computer and carefully wrote a separation agreement, thinking about divorce. After printing it out and reviewing it, he signed it. He made a copy for himself and left the other on the kitchen table for Rose. Then he saved the document as a PDF to be filed the next day. He called the process server to have Rose served at work on Friday. Afterward, Bill felt drained, but he went to the pool house to have a look around. There was a futon couch, so he opened it up into a bed. It was a double. He realized he needed sheets, a clothes rack, and a chest of drawers, all of which would fit. He went to Walmart to buy what he needed and also got a lock set for the sliding door to the pool house. He brought everything back and set up the space. It already had a microwave, a small fridge, and a 2-burner stove. It was 5 o'clock. Rose would be home from work soon. He went upstairs to put on his running clothes and then slipped out the back. He ran for about an hour, doing intervals to push himself. When he got home, he saw Rose's car in the driveway. Inside, she was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the petition in front of her. It was clear she'd been crying. She looked up at him and said, "Can't you at least try?" Bill sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. "I've thought about it a lot, Rose, but I just can't stay married to you if you're with other men, even just once. I tried to imagine it, but I know it would only hurt us both. So, no." Rose wiped her eyes, looking down. "George didn't answer my calls, but I have other plans for Friday." Bill nodded sadly. "If that's what you've decided, Rose, I'm really sorry that we couldn't make this work." Suddenly she jumped up and ran toward the stairs, but then turned and rushed at him, clearly upset. Bill stepped aside, catching her in his arms. He held her tight as she struggled, breathing heavily. Eventually she stopped fighting and went still. He whispered gently, "Is it okay if I let go now?" Through her tears, she whispered back, "I don't want you to let go, Bill." Bill carried her upstairs and gently placed her on their bed. For a moment, they just stared at each other, both confused and hurting. "I don't understand," Bill said softly. "Why is this happening, Rose? You're breaking my heart." She continued to cry, but slowly started to calm down. They remained there, the room quiet, both feeling the weight of their troubled relationship. Neither of them said anything more, and the tension between them lingered. They lay on the bed, still grappling with everything they had lost, unsure of where to go from here. She let out a soft moan, her body reacting to his touch. Bill reached around and gently stroked her, causing her to shudder with intensity. After a few moments, he said firmly, "You're difficult sometimes, Rose, but you're with me now. Understand?" She nodded, breathless. "Yes, Bill, I understand." He stayed with her, making sure she was fully in the moment. Afterward, he turned her gently onto her back, watching her closely as they stayed together. There was a deep connection between them, even in the silence. As they both lay back, catching their breath, Rose snuggled up to him, her voice softer now. "I'm sorry, Bill. I had these feelings, and I didn't know how to tell you." Bill didn't respond right away. "It's not easy to understand, Rose. After all this time, why didn't you say anything before?" Rose hesitated, then started to explain. "It goes back to when I was younger, my mom's boyfriend. Well, I overheard things and it stuck with me. Then in college there was this guy, and I let him take charge and I didn't tell anyone. I didn't think I could. But you've always been so strong. You're independent, and it never seemed like something you want," Bill said, confused. "I know. It's hard to explain. I never thought I'd act on it. I suppressed it, especially after we had the kids. But now things are different, and I didn't know how to tell you what I wanted." Bill listened carefully. "And what about George? He was confident, and I thought he might give me what I wanted. But nothing really happened, Bill. We only talked. That's all." Bill sighed. "I don't get it, Rose. You wanted something, but not from me?" Rose looked down. "I guess I wanted it to be different. It wasn't about you, Bill. I just didn't know how to say it." They lay there for a while, neither of them knowing what to say next. Eventually, they drifted off to sleep, exhausted. The next morning, Bill woke up early and headed to the shower. Rose joined him, helping him wash up in silence. Afterward, they shared breakfast together, the tension from the night before still lingering but unspoken. As Rose was getting ready for work, Bill noticed her rubbing her side where she had a slight bruise from the previous day. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "A little," Rose admitted. "Take care of yourself," Bill said, giving her a small smile. With that, Rose finished dressing and headed out the door, leaving their conversation from the night before behind, but knowing they'd have more to figure out in the days ahead. Bill wanted Rose to understand something clearly. "I want you to always remember who you're with," he said firmly. "Yes, Bill," she replied quietly, getting dressed. They both headed to work. Rose's unusual decision to go without certain undergarments made her feel uneasy at first, but she quickly got used to it. Occasionally, her mind drifted back to what happened between her and Bill, stirring feelings she couldn't quite place. As her thoughts wandered, she found herself imagining other men, George or even Troy and his friend from the gym, and it made her feel more conflicted. She realized she was struggling with certain desires she hadn't fully admitted to herself. While being submissive to Bill had stirred something in her, she was starting to question if that would be enough in the long run. She worried that if she met someone who understood her desires better than Bill did, she might be tempted to follow them down a path she wasn't sure she could turn away from. It was a troubling thought, one that she couldn't shake. Meanwhile, Bill was having his own doubts. While the previous night had been intense, he realized that treating Rose in that way didn't align with how he wanted their relationship to be. He loved her, and what they shared wasn't meant to turn into a power struggle. He didn't want their marriage to become something where control and dominance replaced trust and partnership. Still, he decided to push the boundaries a bit longer, unsure of where else they could go from here. That Friday night, after they got home from work, Bill ordered pizza, and they sat in an awkward silence, both unsure of what to say next. Finally, after the pizza arrived and they ate in near silence, Rose broke the tension. "I liked last night, and I know you did too, but—" Bill nodded, cutting her off. "But it's not the answer to everything, is it?" Rose shook her head. "No, maybe it's part of the answer, but not all of it. Should I do something while we talk?" She gave him a playful smile. "That would be a good start," Bill said, amused. Rose gave him a teasing look before she knelt in front of him. She giggled, noticing the tension in the room ease a bit. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" she teased. Bill chuckled, feeling awkward. "I suppose I am." Rose laughed softly. "But even now, I feel like I'm the one in control, Bill." Bill fumbled for a response. Well, you know it's true," she said gently. "We've known each other a long time, and I think I've always had more control over things than you realized. Even now, you let me lead." Bill was quiet, and Rose smiled softly. "Why do you let me have that control?" she asked, looking at him seriously. "I don't know," Bill replied honestly. "It's not like you always get your way." "But most of the time I do," Rose pointed out with a knowing smile. Bill paused, reflecting on her words. She wasn't wrong, and it left him unsure of what to say next. Rose and Bill sat in uncomfortable silence. Rose broke it with a question, testing the waters. "Who's really in control here, Bill?" Bill sighed. "Just because you feel in control doesn't mean you can break your promises. I don't give in the way you think. You don't have that much power." Rose's tone sharpened. "I could break my vows whenever I want. The only question is what you do about it." Bill met her gaze. "I told you, Rose, we'd be done." Rose tilted her head, not backing down. "You've never explained why. I wouldn't throw it in your face, unless you wanted to know." Bill's voice grew firm. It doesn't matter, I'd still know. You'd be with someone else, and eventually everyone would know. So it's about being embarrassed? Rose asked. Yes, it is. Rose smirked slightly. Even if you were seeing someone like Nora? Bill hesitated. It's not just that. I couldn't live with myself knowing I couldn't keep my own wife. Rose tried to lighten the mood, leaning closer, but Bill wasn't interested. He stood up, putting distance between them. This isn't working, Rose. As he walked out of the room, Rose felt the weight of her words. She hadn't found a solution, and now she feared it might be too late to fix things. Bill stepped outside onto the patio, thinking through his options. It became clear to him that the only way forward was to file for divorce. Rose had made it clear she wanted to be with other people, and there was no coming back from that. That night, they barely spoke. As they lay in bed, Bill finally broke the silence. I know you're going to do what you want, but I'm asking you to wait until we're divorced. Rose's voice was cold. Forget it, Bill. Bill's response was just as sharp. Not anymore, Rose. Not anymore. She got up and left the room, choosing to sleep elsewhere that night. The rest of the weekend passed in the same frosty atmosphere. On Sunday evening, Bill brought up the inevitable conversation again. Can you hold off on everything until the divorce is final? Rose shrugged. That means no intimacy for either of us for 6 months. I know, but I don't want to feel like a fool in the meantime. You wouldn't if you agreed to my suggestion, she replied. Bill sighed. I'm going to file for a separation. Do you want the house? Rose hesitated. I don't know, do you? Yes. Maybe we can live in separate spaces until it's over. I can move to the pool house, and once the divorce is final, I'll buy your share. Rose looked at Bill, her husband of so many years. She felt a deep sadness. Their values, their needs, just didn't align anymore. She had desires that Bill couldn't fulfill, and it wasn't his fault. It surprised her that they had lasted this long. She had pushed down her wants for years, and in some ways had taken control of their relationship. It had been subtle, but it was there. Rose had always known she could take that control further, but she held back, fearing it would ruin them. Now it seemed everything was crumbling anyway. She loved when Bill took charge. It was a game they played, but it wasn't enough for her anymore. What she truly craved was someone who could meet her needs fully, someone strong and commanding, and she knew just the type. She felt trapped by the rules that wouldn't let her change things. I'll have a separation agreement ready tomorrow, she said. But I won't agree to not date anyone, and you don't have to either. 6 months? No way. Well, we could just keep it a secret. Bill replied, Let me think about it. Are you okay with lying? Maybe. No, I want to see other people soon. Then we won't need to pretend. Okay, I'm sorry, he said as tears rolled down his face. She hugged him. Me too. But I hope we can move on. We won't, Rosie. We won't get over this. Rose wrote the separation agreement. It was straightforward. Split things up. Bill buys the house as part of the divorce. She emailed it to Bill. He signed it and sent it back. She filed it with the court for a no-fault divorce. All finished in one day. On Monday evening, she made burgers and fries for dinner. After that, Bill went to the pool house. It was a nice place, but he felt lonely and sad. Rose was upset too. But then she thought of the 2 guys at her gym. Just thinking about them lifted her spirits a bit. She watched TV and went to bed. On Tuesday at work, Bill had an unexpected visitor after lunch, Nora. She walked into his office, closed the door, and sat down on his couch. I saw some papers yesterday. You and Rose are separating, she said. That didn't take long. Please keep this quiet, Nora. Sure, but I'm interested in you. Maybe tonight? She moved in a way that caught his attention. Nora was smart and lively, and he often wondered what it would be like to be with her. But he hesitated. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Bill, I'm guessing Rose is the one who wants this separation. She's restless, right? Yes, he admitted. She wants to date other men, open the marriage. Her statements were bold. Nora, you're very observant. Still, I bet she'll be out on a date by this weekend. We can see who moves on first, and believe me, you'll have a great time. Nora moved closer to him. He felt captivated, almost unable to move. She leaned over and kissed him gently. Then she pulled back and looked at him, smiling. 7 o'clock at my place. I'll make you something special. But we don't have to eat if we don't want to, she teased with a playful tone. Nora gave him a sly smile, turned and walked out, her confidence clear. That was pretty much the end of Bill's workday. Lack of focus. He left at 5, and there was Nora, getting into her car in the parking lot. She pointed at him, asking a question. He nodded. They drove away together. Bill went home. He had thought carefully before giving Nora a signal in the parking lot. He guessed that Rose and Nora had some kind of connection, maybe even an understanding. But he wasn't sure. He thought it didn't matter much. If Rose was trying to set him up, then so be it. If she wanted to be with other people, that was her choice. He felt resigned, thinking she was gone for good. But if Rose wasn't doing that, she was in for a surprise when he went out with Nora for dinner. He wondered how Rose would handle the news dot. When Bill got home, Rose wasn't back from work yet. He arrived a bit early, so he packed an overnight bag and put it in his car. Rose came home around 5:40. She walked in and asked, "What are we doing for dinner?" Bill found that strange. It wasn't her usual first question. "I'm going out to dinner. You're on your own." "Who? I'm going to Nora's place. I thought you knew that, Rose." Rose's face turned red. She was quiet, and Bill understood what that meant, Dot. He said, "Rose, don't do anything here in this house. If you do, I will not react well. Understood? But this is my house, too. If that happens, our agreement about the house is over. Other things may follow." "That's not fair, Bill," he raised his voice. "None of this is fair. If you bring someone here, you'll find out what unfair really means." Rose took a step back. Okay, fine. Before I leave for my dinner, I want your promise. Not tonight, not ever, okay? Can I trust you?" "Yes." "Did you plan to bring someone home tonight?" "No, not tonight. But you have the pool house to use. Go to your friend's place instead." Bill turned and left the house. Soon Rose heard his car drive away. This hadn't gone as she expected. She should have realized Bill would suspect something was up between the two women. But he should have also known that their arrangement was possible only because Nora really liked him. Maybe he did understand that. Meanwhile, she would have to wait until Friday night for a change. She had originally planned for Wednesday at their house, but now that was off. She called her friend Troy. "I have to cancel Wednesday, but I'm free Friday after work and all weekend." He laughed. "Me and Biggie, right? All weekend?" "Yes, if you can manage it." "Oh, Rosie, we'll keep you busy. Just not at my place. My husband won't allow that." "Well, I saw him last month. I could handle him. He doesn't seem that tough. Just stay away from him, Troy. It's better for you. Trust me. And I don't want a divorce. I just want to be with different people." "Okay." Bill handed Rose the address to his condo before heading out. "If you change your mind, let me know," he said. Before leaving, Rose settled in to watch some PBS, her mind heavy with everything going on. At 7 o'clock, Bill arrived at Nora's house right on time. Nora greeted him at the door, wearing a simple blue dress and sandals. She smiled, slightly amused. Well, you actually came." "Yeah," Bill replied, a bit uneasy. "Even though this whole thing with my wife feels like a setup, I feel like I've been handed over to you, Nora." Nora's expression softened. "I'm sorry, Bill. She called. We talked. I'm not paying for you or anything, but Bill, I would have..." Her voice was soft, her eyes curious. Bill shook his head with a slight smile. "Then I'd feel like like I was being hired." Nora gently closed the door and pulled him closer, her hands resting on his back. She whispered playfully, "Let's see if you could live up to that, then." With a teasing smile, she led him toward her bedroom. Inside, she closed the door behind them, leaving the room dimly lit by the soft light from the window. She sat down on the bed and looked up at him. "Show me what you've got. Take it slow." Bill hesitated, but then started unbuttoning his shirt, casting it aside. As he kicked off his sandals, he saw Nora watching him closely. He took his time undoing his belt and unzipped his khaki shorts, letting them drop to the floor. All that was left were his boxers, and Nora was clearly intrigued. He turned his back to her, slowly pushing down the boxers. He felt Nora's hands reach out, but he stepped away teasingly. "You're a tease," she laughed softly, a hint of surprise in her voice. Bill grinned and played along, draping his boxers over his arm before stepping closer to her. Nora's breathing quickened, her focus never leaving him. "Enough games," she said firmly. "Now." Bill complied, and Nora reached out, touching his arm with a smile. She seemed to take everything in, her expression filled with appreciation. "Your turn," she said, pointing to her sandals. "Start there." Bill knelt down and carefully removed her sandals one by one, placing them aside. Nora stood up, giving him a small nod. He reached for the buttons on her dress, undoing them slowly as she slipped out of it gracefully. She was confident, and Bill could see that she had been waiting for this moment. They lay down together, quiet for a moment, as if trying to process what had brought them there. Bill found himself caught in the intensity of it all, feeling the weight of the situation, but unable to pull away from what was happening. The night passed, and by the end, both Bill and Nora were left with their own thoughts. For Bill, it was overwhelming, something far beyond what he had expected. She had a very memorable moment, one that left her speechless. They lay next to each other, feeling relaxed. Finally, Nora spoke. "Wow." Bill nodded in agreement, still lost in thought. After a moment, Nora sighed and moved away to lie beside him. Bill was starting to regain his composure and felt surprisingly content. Nora then got up and said, "I'm hungry." "Me too. What do you have?" Bill asked. They enjoyed the shrimp salad she had made along with some Italian bread. They were both not fully dressed. Nora took the dishes to the sink to wash. Bill quietly approached her. She turned, playfully pulling him back into the bedroom. She bounced onto the bed and said, "Let's have some more fun." Bill liked a challenge. He slowly joined her, and they began to embrace each other again. The moment felt wild and passionate to him, and it lasted a while since he wasn't quite ready to stop. It ended with a strong connection that surprised them both. Afterward, they lay together, feeling comfortable. He asked, "What about that other guy you mentioned?" Nora laughed. "You don't think I've just waited for you, do you? I have other admirers." "I can only imagine, but other admirers?" "Women in their 40s sometimes like younger guys. I suspect that's what's going on with Rose." "She wanted George. I told her no. Now she talks about having 2 other admirers." "Oh, I understand. I'm not sure where she met them." "The gym, of course. That's where I found mine too. Though I've never been with 2 at the same time." Bill felt a spark of interest again. Nora said, "I guess women have some advantages. Having options is nice." She smiled at him. "But your one option is just fine," she added. They soon found themselves wrapped up in each other again, with Nora taking the lead. Bill noticed she often took charge, but surprisingly, he didn't mind. Afterward, they dozed off. At dawn, Bill was gently awakened. It felt nice. Eventually, they showered and got ready for work. Bill had clothes packed in his bag. At work, they tried to act as usual. But after lunch, George entered Bill's office under the pretense of discussing a case. After their chat, George said, "You were with Nora." Bill didn't reply. George continued, "Things have changed." Bill stated firmly, "That's not true, George. I still feel the same. No involvement." George looked at him intently. Just then, Nora walked into the office. "Come on, boys. Let's keep it cool." George left, looking frustrated. Nora asked, "What happened?" Bill replied, "George is very aware. He thinks we're involved. He wants Rose." "And what did you say?" she asked. "No. I told him no. Like before." "Why?" "Because he's difficult. And he would smile at you, right?" "Yes. Maybe that's why now. He used to be someone I dated, Bill. I ended it. He's feeling jealous." "Oh, was he?" She laughed. "He's really good with relationships. So are you. He's younger and taller. That's what younger guys are like. But it's not just about looks. I ended it because he was rude. That was right when he arrived. It's all in the past now. I still don't want him with my wife." "I agree. Bill, we had a wonderful time last night. We can do that again. But, I've been divorced for 12 years. I'm not looking for a long-term partner." Nora had a son, Timothy, who was in college. Her ex-husband, Henry, lived nearby. They shared parenting duties. Bill hadn't considered anything serious, but he had to admit he might be getting there with Nora. He said, "I understand. You know, Rose is going out Friday night. She mentioned it. And I'd really like some company. It's a date. Let's go dancing. Dinner too. Then back to my place for some fun." She smiled at him. "Sounds good." He smiled back. Rose was home when Bill arrived on Wednesday evening. He came in the front but was just passing through to the pool house. Rose stood in his way and asked, "You and Nora?" "Yes, you set it up. I'm sure you'll hear about it." "You know, Rose, we're done for good now, all that scheming. Even if you said you'd stop, I'd still leave. As far as I'm concerned, we're completely finished." Bill walked to the pool house. Rose was shocked by his response. She thought he would relax after being with Nora. Wow, that didn't happen. She sat at the table where she had been preparing a meal for two. She thought back to the last few days and began to see things from Bill's point of view. She realized she had been fooling herself. A heavy sadness settled over her. She mourned the loss of her marriage, something she never planned for. Rose sat crying in the kitchen for nearly an hour. Then she went upstairs to shower. That usually helped, but not this time. As she dried off, her phone buzzed. It was Nora. Nora asked, "How did it go? Is he okay with everything?" Rose cried harder. "We're done, really done, and I didn't get to have any fun." The sobs continued. Nora responded, "I'll come right over. Don't be so negative. People say things they don't mean." She hung up and drove over to Bill and Rose's house, a 20-minute drive. When she arrived, Rose was in the living room waiting. She had stopped crying. Nora's words about how people sometimes don't mean what they say had calmed her a little. She opened the door, and they hugged as it closed. Rose started crying again. "It was such a bad idea, Nora. So bad." "Calm down. You haven't been with anyone yet. Let's see what we can do. Where is he?" "In the pool house." "That's where he sleeps now, I guess." "What did he say?" Rose explained everything. Nora replied, "He feels really betrayed. First, because you wanted to be with other guys, and second, because you tricked him into that. And now he feels hurt by me too." "Wow. I could end it all, I suppose, but he said, yeah, I don't know, I shouldn't have introduced you to those guys at the gym. I gave you ideas. And George, too. It was my fault." "Can you talk to him? Now?" "Yes. Tell him I made a mistake. I won't do it again." "Okay. I'll try." Nora left and walked to the pool house. She knocked on the sliding door and Bill looked out before letting her in. "What are you doing here?" "I called Rose to check how she was after you got home. She was really upset. I had to come over. She thought she could have it all. She can't have it all, just not with me. She has made it clear what she wants. I've been clear too. And now that you both set me up, what does she want?" "Okay, Bill, I admit we planned it together. But I did it because I like you. Rose wants something you can't give her. And I should wait while someone else gives it to her? No way. She says she won't do it. I don't believe that. She might wait a little, but she'll go for it eventually. I realize now that we aren't compatible anymore. You should see what happens if she tries it once. Then you can talk. You had your chance. That's not fair." "Why not? What's the harm?" "It would break us, Nora. Maybe I'm wrong for feeling this way, but it's how I feel. She feels it too. We're done. The sooner she realizes it, the better." "Is there no hope? None at all?" Bill shook his head. "If she still goes this weekend, I won't need you, Nora. I didn't realize you two were so close." "We weren't. Now? We both seem to have lost you." She turned and left. Bill got ready and went for a run. Nora stayed with Rose. They drank some wine and fell asleep on the couch with the TV on. On Thursday, all three went to work. Nora was late, while Bill arrived on time. He made some changes regarding their finances because of the separation. After lunch, Nora tried to talk to him, but he ignored her. He went through his meetings and went home. Rose was also late. She didn't have much to do, so she felt down and often thought about better times with Bill. Each time she was lost in thought, she felt a wave of sadness. By the end of the day, she found herself really angry at Bill. He was being unreasonable. It was either he came around or he didn't. She had planned to cancel her date for Friday, but her anger made her decide to go through with it. If her marriage was over, she might as well enjoy herself. When she got home, She didn't see Bill at all. Bill was in the pool house, and Rose knew it. She had a quiet dinner and a glass of wine by herself. Friday morning, she woke early and went off to work. Her mood had shifted from sadness to something more hopeful. Though traces of uncertainty still lingered. After work, she arrived home by 5, dressed up, and soon left for Toby's condo. Bill watched as she drove away. He went for a long run to clear his mind, followed by some time lifting weights. Afterward, he showered and tried to sleep. Though it was a restless night. At Toby's place, he opened the door in gym shorts, his tall, muscular frame filling the doorway. His light brown ponytail and blue eyes gave him a confident look. His friend Biggie stood beside him, equally tall and muscular, with dark skin, a shaved head, and a broad smile. He, too, wore gym shorts and a tank top. Both men greeted Rose, who suddenly felt vulnerable despite being fully dressed, while they were nearly bare. Toby welcomed her with a grin. "Glad you're here. Let's get started." Rose's nervousness turned into excitement. She hesitated only for a moment before slowly stepping out of her shoes and slipping off her dress. Her movements were careful, and she felt the weight of their gazes. She stood there, taking a deep breath. "Kneel," Toby said. Without hesitation, Rose knelt, the room thick with tension as she followed instructions. The evening went on in a blur, and she followed their lead. The experience was intense, but in the back of her mind, she knew she had crossed a line. Despite the excitement, part of her was still grappling with the consequences of her actions. Back at home, Bill lay awake wondering where their marriage had gone wrong and what might come next. Both of them knew the choices made that night would be hard to undo. She swallowed nervously, trying to calm herself. At that moment, Biggie felt excited. It was overwhelming for her, and she lost consciousness for a brief moment. When she came to, she rolled onto her back. Biggie and Toby were beside the bed, looking at her. Biggie said, "You need to help us out." She understood what he meant. She crawled over to him and gave him her attention, then turned to Toby. She felt grateful and a bit timid around them, which made her feel a rush of emotion. The whole weekend went by in a similar way. Rose took several showers to feel fresh. She spent her nights with the guys and woke up next to them each morning. They were all she needed, and she didn't eat much. Meanwhile, at the pool house, it was Bill's day to volunteer at the local shelter. Mary worked there too. She was of average height with short brown hair and lively brown eyes. She had a friendly face and was warm-hearted. She volunteered on weekends and worked as a gym teacher, which made her popular with the students. Mary had never been married. She had a long relationship with a man named Bobby, but it didn't work out. He was not ready for commitment, and after 2 years without any future plans, she decided to move on. Since then, she had dated a few people, mostly men, but she kept her options open. Mary noticed Bill walk into the food bank section. He looked well, but maybe a bit down, which made her curious. She remembered meeting Rose a couple of days before when Rose came with Bill to help at the food bank. Mary thought they didn't seem like a perfect match, so noticing Bill's mood, she saw an opportunity. She had always found him appealing, even if he was older. He was fit, kind, and strong. They worked together, organizing food on the shelves. It was tough work, and they took a break around 11. Mary led Bill outside and pushed him gently onto a picnic bench. "Something's bothering you. It must be your wife," she said. Bill looked surprised, but also a little intrigued. "How did you know, Mary?" "I pay attention to people, and you know I like you." "She decided to be with other guys, so we're separating. I plan to divorce her. I wouldn't be surprised if she's with someone else right now." "That's a shame. Want to hang out with someone new?" "Really?" "I'm serious, Bill. You can come over to my place after we finish here." She smiled at him. Then she said, "If you do, you'll never want her again. I promise." Her smile wasn't very friendly. He looked at her. She had changed from a nice, steady woman to someone much bolder in an instant. What could he do? What could she do? He said, "Deal." They shared a kiss that excited him. Then she took him back to work. He found it hard to focus. Strange thoughts kept distracting him, pulling him away from his usual routine. They wrapped things up around 5. Mary said, "Follow me to my place. Don't get lost." They parked near some garden apartments. Mary's was on the ground floor with a back door that slid open. Once they were inside, she moved in quickly. Bill found himself on her couch as she sat on him playfully. She tousled his hair and teased him. She whispered, "We're going to have a lot of fun." And they did. Mary took off her clothes quickly, then signaled for him to do the same, and he obliged. She took his hand and led him to her bedroom. Mary playfully engaged with him, and they both swept each other away in the moment. Bill, feeling the excitement build, changed positions, and they soon fell back onto the bed, both happy and breathless. Eventually, she said, "I knew you'd be great. You're stronger than many I've met. Let's eat." Mary put a calzone from the freezer in the oven, and they waited for it to cook. Bill asked, "Why have you been single for so long?" She shared a story about a past relationship and told him more about herself, including a friendship with someone from the local police department. She asked Bill, "What about Rose? Why isn't she with you?" "She wanted someone different. She's more submissive, and I figured that out eventually. But it didn't feel right for me, and we both realized that." Mary smiled at him. "You're not like that. Maybe you're more like her." Bill was surprised by her insight. He didn't say much. "Maybe." The timer for the calzone went off. Mary took it out, and they shared a meal in the kitchen, feeling relaxed. She then said, "You can wash the dishes." Bill hesitated, looking at Mary. She met his gaze. He got up and cleaned the plates, putting them in the dishwasher. When he turned back, he felt a bit embarrassed. Mary smiled at him and reassured, "Don't worry, Bill, I won't share this. It's just between us." Bill was surprised by his own feelings. Who would have thought washing dishes could create such excitement? Mary thought for a moment. She decided to be direct. "Bill, from now on, you're with me. Do you understand?" Bill felt a rush of excitement from her words. He replied, "Yes, I understand." "What do you understand, Bill?" she asked. "That I belong to you, Mary. You have all the power. Don't worry. Just listen to me. Okay. I want to be close to you now." She stood up and walked toward the bedroom, and Bill followed her. She gently pushed him back onto the bed. She sat on him and lowered herself into a close embrace. They kissed, and he responded to her movements. She told him, "Wait for my signal." Then she leaned closer, and they both felt a rising energy. Bill tried hard to hold back his feelings, but he couldn't. Fortunately, it seemed to bring her joy too. She relaxed against him and whispered, "This is going to be amazing." "Uh-huh. But you will be tested for not following my lead." She slid off him and said, "Turn over." When he did, she playfully tapped him on his back multiple times. It started gentle but became a bit firmer. By the time she finished, Bill was feeling excited again. It was clear when he turned back to face her. "You enjoyed that, right?" "Yes, I needed that." "Oh, I agree." She took the lead again. She was feeling tender and preferred not to go further at that moment. As she sensed he was reaching his peak, she guided him in a different direction, and they both laughed together afterward. She handed him a tissue. They cuddled a bit. She said, "Bill, we need to think carefully about us. I want you in my life, but I don't want someone who isn't confident. We don't need to tell everyone. I understand. Your children, family, and work might find it hard to understand. We can find a way, Mary. I've never felt this excited before. You will help set our boundaries." They got up and watched a movie together. Mary made him sit at her feet. As the movie continued, he started to relax. When she noticed, she nudged him gently with her foot, and he perked up again. When it was time for bed, she said, "You're not under my command anymore, until I decide otherwise." So they slept peacefully through the night. In the morning, they took a shower together. Bill helped wash her completely. Then she playfully sat on him without any contact. Afterward, she smiled down at him and said, "Thanks, that was nice. Let's have breakfast. What are you making?" He prepared scrambled eggs and toast, showing off his cooking skills. Bill stayed with her on Sunday. They enjoyed a nice walk together, and he even tidied up her house. She commented, "I could really get used to this, but remember to clean every area." By Sunday evening, they returned to Bill's place. They were discussing community projects while both were dressed. But then Mary felt a rush of desire. She said, "Let's get closer now." Bill and Mary found themselves lost in the moment, with everything around them fading away. As they spent time together, Bill felt more like himself again, regaining a sense of energy and confidence. Suddenly, the lights outside by the pool flicked on. Bill quickly grabbed a pair of shorts and stepped outside to investigate. Rose stood at the kitchen door watching him. She waved, but Bill turned away, not wanting to engage. Mary, however, had noticed Rose. Without hesitation, she walked outside, still unclothed, and waved at Rose with a casual smile. Rose stepped out as well, wearing a robe. "Hi, Mary," she said. "Looks like you got what you wanted." "Yep, just needed a chance," Mary replied sweetly, still smiling. Rose, clearly unsettled, let her robe fall to the ground, standing bare before them. Her body bore marks that suggested her recent time with someone else. She turned slightly, showing the evidence of her evening. She smiled at Bill. "I had a good time too." Mary walked up to Bill and, without hesitation, pulled down his shorts. She looked at Rose and said with a calm voice, "This is mine now. You can't have it anymore." Rose's face flashed with anger. She had been holding it in since seeing Mary walk out with such boldness. But as she stood there, her frustration grew when Mary leaned in and gave Bill a long, intense kiss. When they finally broke apart, Rose had already disappeared back inside, unable to watch any longer. Mary turned to Bill, chuckling. "You're a good guy, Bill. I almost showed her more, but I figured she got the point." Bill sighed. "I think she understood clearly." Mary laughed. "She'll figure it out soon enough." They returned inside, and Mary stayed close to Bill, making sure their connection was unmistakable. Meanwhile, Rose, back in the house, couldn't see what was happening in the pool house, but she could hear the sounds carrying through the night. At first, she was filled with rage, furious that Mary had taken what she believed was hers, Bill, her husband. But as the night wore on, the reality began to sink in. Rose broke down in tears, realizing again that her marriage was truly over. She had been fooling herself, thinking that she could get Bill back, especially after her recent mistakes. She thought a simple promise would make things right, that Bill would return to her as he always had in the past. Now, however, it was clear that Mary had stepped in and claimed a place Rose once thought was hers alone. Flaunting herself earlier had only provoked Mary to make it clear who Bill belonged to now. Rose knew deep down that Bill had moved on, and nothing she could do would change that dot. Heartbroken, Rose cried herself to sleep that night, slowly accepting that Bill was no longer hers. However, Rose wasn't someone who would dwell on her pain for long. She was too focused on herself to stay down for long. On Monday morning, Rose woke up to the smell of coffee coming from the pool house. She got dressed and headed to work. At the office, she started thinking about how to get back at Bill for leaving her. All she wanted was a little fun, so she called George. "Hi, George. It's Rose," she said in a soft voice. George sounded unsure. "Hi," he replied. "I thought we could reconnect now that Bill and I are no longer together." "I'm not sure about that, Rose. Bill was pretty intense before." "True, but he has someone new now." "Who is it?" "Not Nora. It's someone from a food bank. She's the one he's interested in now." "And what about you?" "I had my fun. You'd be more like a casual companion." "I appreciate that, but you did warn me about Bill." "You don't have to worry. He doesn't have any hold on me now. He hasn't caused trouble for my other friends." "Let's meet for dinner at Gino's at 7. "Sounds great. See you then." George hung up and decided to see Nora. He felt a strong pull towards Rose. There was something about her that fascinated him. She reminded him of his Aunt Beth, who was only a bit older than him. Growing up, he had a crush on her, and she used to tease him about it. At his graduation party, they shared a kiss that he'd never forget. But he knew Rose wasn't exactly like Beth. Still, he found her very attractive. However, there was a part of him that hesitated. He didn't want to get into trouble with Bill over Rose. He knocked on Nora's door when he arrived. "Hi, I could use some advice about my love life," he said. Nora chuckled. "That sounds interesting, but I'm not sure I can help. I didn't mean you. I was talking about Bill and Rose." "A love triangle, huh? I wouldn't recommend it," she joked. "No, I just want Rose. Bill pushed me away before, but now she wants me, and I want her. But I don't want to get into trouble. What do you think?" Nora considered this. She was always thinking about what was best for her. Go for it. Bill isn't as dangerous now that he and Rose are apart. She had a wild weekend, so he probably won't react well. True, but he still has that weapon. He won't risk everything for her now. Feeling bold, George decided to confront Bill. He knocked on Bill's door, and when he was let in, George sat down and said, "Your wife called me today. She wants to meet up. She says that you and she are apart." Bill thought about it. He said, "All right, we are apart. I'm not going back to her. So, 2 things. First, you need to keep it quiet until the divorce is final." "Got it. Okay." "Second, let her know that you talked to me and that I'm fine with this." George thought for a moment. Then he said, "You're making it clear that there's no chance of getting back together. It feels disrespectful to me." "Not really. I pushed you away because I didn't want to deal with any gossip here at work. It would have been embarrassing. Besides, I didn't want her to be with anyone else. But she's already moved on. And you won't make fun of me, right?" "Right, of course not." "One more thing. Don't go too far with her." "Okay, no problem. Enjoy yourself." So George kept the dinner date. He met Rose at a relaxed restaurant. When they sat down, he said, "I want you to know that I was unsure about this because of Bill, but I asked him if he would be angry for being with you. He said it was fine." Rose's expression changed quickly from shock to anger. "I see. Well, Georgie, you're in for a real experience. Let's keep things light tonight. I'll take care of the rest later." George smiled at her. "I can help with that." They ordered salads and some wine. Once they arrived at his apartment, George took control, which was what she wanted, and he was aware of it. He settled into his comfortable chair and watched her. She felt excited. George looked much more appealing than Toby or even Biggie. When she was ready, he motioned for her to turn around slowly so he could see. He stood up, motioned for her to sit on the floor, and changed into something more comfortable. She watched him, impressed. He had a striking appearance. He said, "Just relax." She smiled at him, a mix of eagerness and admiration. He told her, "Let's go to the bedroom." She followed his lead, looking up at him. He got ready and asked, "What do you want, Rose?" "I want to feel close to you." He answered that wish. She felt a rush of excitement. They shared a moment together, both caught up in the experience, enjoying each other's company. Her last moment of joy was the best she had ever felt. At least that's what she thought then. Later, she realized she had felt this way before, but only with Bill, not with Toby or Biggie. The 2 of them spent the night together. George was always the one in charge. Rose stayed the night and showed her affection for George in the morning. At work, Rose was mostly happy. The time they spent together had been special, and she actually liked George, unlike Toby and Biggie, whom she only used. But Bill was still on her mind. She truly loved him, and when she thought of him, it brought back many good memories, but also sadness. George went to work feeling a bit uneasy about Bill. People could change their minds. He didn't see Bill until the afternoon when they bumped into each other by the copier. Bill waved George into his office. Bill asked, "Did you?" "Yes." George's voice was a bit unsure. "Well, I could be interested in her. She's great for me. Really great. It's not just about the fun, you know, though that part is good too." "You're in love with her already? Isn't it too soon?" "It's not too soon. We had a good friendship first. Sorry. Still, it feels fast, and she's older. I actually like that. I have my reasons." "Are you seeing her tonight? And more nights?" "Yes, she's coming to my place. I'm going to try to cook. My advice, keep it simple. Burgers or maybe hot dogs." George nodded. He asked, "What about you? Rose mentioned another woman in your life." "I do. She's nice. I met her at the food bank." "Is she younger?" "Yep, younger than you even. She might keep me busy." "Good luck. I'm glad about Rose and me, thanks." "George, she was dealing with some personal issues, but you seem like you can support her." "I hope so. Are you saying she might stray? I mean, with someone else?" "I don't know. Right now, she's a bit unpredictable." George cooked hot dogs, the special ones he got from the store. He also bought a ready-made salad. That was fine because Rose wasn't too concerned about food. She needed protein, and she got it. She stayed with George every night that week, including Friday. She cleaned, helped out, and was mostly happy. George was even happier. On Saturday, she needed to get some clothes from her house. George took her there. Bill and Mary were by the pool. No one could see them from outside, so they weren't dressed. Mary wanted to enjoy the sun completely. When Rose went upstairs to pack, George peeked out to the pool. He was quite surprised by what he saw. Bill was in good shape, and Mary looked very appealing. Like a cheerleader, George stayed hidden. But Bill noticed him. Curious, he put on his shorts and came to check it out. He told Mary to cover up George felt a rush of worry as Bill came into the house, but he knew Bill wasn't armed, so he said, "Hi, Bill. We're just here for Rose to grab some things. She could have given me a heads up. I mean, that you would come with her. Mary was just relaxing." "I noticed. She's attractive." Rose walked into the kitchen and asked, "Who's attractive?" George jumped a little. Bill chuckled. "George just got quite the view of Mary." Rose hugged George from behind and said playfully, "Who's the fairest of them all, George?" "You are, Rosie. No doubt about it." Bill added, "Doesn't that make you the wicked queen, Rose?" Rose looked a bit annoyed at first, but then she laughed. She appreciated Bill's quick humor. She responded, "I can be a bit wicked, that's for sure." She gave him a smile while playfully teasing George. She was trying to get a reaction from him. She didn't get much from Bill, but did from George. George felt a bit uneasy. Bill noticed this and said, "Why don't you two stay for lunch? I'll cook." He was clearly enjoying George's discomfort. George just wanted to leave, but Rose said, "Great, let's head to the pool." She finally let go of George. George felt like he was losing control of the situation. He was supposed to lead, but he followed Rose and Bill to the pool. Bill introduced them, saying, "George, this is Mary. Mary, this is George. He's Rose's boyfriend." Mary waved and said, "Hi." Bill caught that Mary checked George out, and George seemed to do the same. They all settled down. Mary said, "We could use more help at the food bank if you two have some time." Rose replied, "I should have spent more time there with Bill." She glanced at Mary. Bill smiled and added, "Well, Rose, if you'd kept your promises, Mary might still be waiting to join us." "Yeah, I know," Rose replied to Mary. "I thought he might be open to sharing a little. Guess I was mistaken." Bill asked, "So, George, are you going to share Rose?" George was surprised. Bill seemed to think he and Rose were a couple. Actually, he liked that idea. He said, "No, I wouldn't be okay with that." Rose moved to sit on his lap and gave him a kiss. She looked at Bill and said, "He's wonderful." Mary chimed in, "But George, maybe Rose won't want any kids, just maybe one?" She seemed to stir the pot, and Bill couldn't help but smile. Rose looked a bit taken aback. "I can still have kids." "Come on, Mary." Mary apologized. "I just meant everything has changed quickly. It wasn't long ago that you and Bill were happily married." Bill said, "That's another tough question. What about it, Rose?" Rose responded, "I was always happy with you, Bill, but there were things I needed that you couldn't give me." George said, "Maybe now isn't the best time to discuss all this." He was feeling very uneasy. Bill asked, "Why not?" Rose said, "You might feel awkward, Bill. Mary and I could assist you both." She gave Bill a teasing smile. Bill sensed where the conversation was headed. Bill regretted getting involved in the situation in front of George, knowing it wasn't wise. But George, though intelligent enough to be a lawyer, didn't seem to fully grasp the conversation. He simply thought Rose was talking about something physical. Rose stood up from George's lap, noticing he was a bit lost in the discussion. His reaction was obvious, and she felt a brief temptation. She turned to him and said, "Bill has always been more passive, George. I was in control when we were together, and now he's with Mary. Isn't that right, Mary?" George looked between Bill and the women, surprised by the situation. Bill, however, didn't show anger, just acceptance. Rose continued, "But you, George, you give me something Bill couldn't. He doesn't have it in him for long." George grinned, catching on. "So, you two were just different, both looking for something else." Bill felt a bit embarrassed, as Rose had expected. "I could have done it sometimes," he said. Mary smiled gently. "Don't worry, Bill. Just enjoy yourself like we have been." Bill stood up, addressing George. "Just keep all of this out of the office, George. It's bad enough you're involved with my wife." George chuckled. "Don't worry, Bill. I won't say anything." Sensing her moment, Rose grabbed George's hand and said, "Come on, let's go upstairs. You know you're in charge now." She ran off, laughing as George hesitated. Realizing the shift in power, George followed, playfully tapping her as they went inside. Bill watched them leave, feeling drained. He knew he should be angry, but somehow he wasn't. Mary, sensing his mood, stood and walked toward the pool house. "Come with me, Bill. Let's see what you can do." As she walked, Mary dropped her robe and gestured for Bill to follow. She led him inside, directing him with gestures as if he were her companion. Bill followed quietly, going along with what she asked. The night continued, with the sounds of laughter and chatter filling the house. As they rested later, they could hear Rose's voice from the other side of the house, expressing her joy. Mary rolled her eyes, saying, "Payback for everything, I guess." Bill sighed. "Maybe." Mary stood up. "Let's get something to eat." The next day at work, Bill entered George's office and closed the door behind him. "George," Bill said firmly, "I was serious about keeping our personal lives out of the office." George leaned back, looking smug. "I get it. It doesn't make you look good. But you are weak, Bill. That's just how it is." Bill didn't flinch. "Maybe in some ways, but that also makes me dangerous to you. If I find out you've been talking, we'll have a problem." George's expression softened. "Don't worry, I won't say anything. But you're ending things with Rose. People will discover that she and I are together. Nora knows now. I want to be able to go out with her, enjoy dancing and nice meals together. I don't see that as a problem for you." "I don't either. Just don't go around grinning like that." "I promised I wouldn't. Well, maybe when we're alone." He gave a grin. Bill stood up quickly. George flinched at his sudden movement. Bill found it amusing and said, "Grinning can be risky, you know." Then he walked away. George felt uneasy about how much he feared Bill. It reminded him of that first day when things got tough. He thought he could stand up to Bill, but it felt like if he did, he might end up in trouble. He decided it was best not to grin in front of Bill. Mary went to her job too. She got through her classes while thinking about her love life. One thing she realized was that George was one of the most handsome men she had ever seen. She knew he had seen her without clothes before. That thought made her feel nervous. She wondered what to do about it. She had plans for Bill, who was older but made her happy. He satisfied her, especially since he would do almost anything she wished. She had never had a relationship like that before, so she was careful not to push him too far. He had already been hurt by losing his wife to others, and now he had to deal with George, who seemed to be everything he was in still comma. When they had all been together at the pool, she had noticed that George seemed a bit afraid of Bill. She wondered why, feeling sure about her impression. He seemed wary, almost jumpy around Bill. She wanted to find out what Bill had done to make him feel that way. Maybe she would tease George a little next time they were all together. After all, he had seen everything about her. Rose felt mostly happy. She had shared a night with George while still married to Bill, but Bill hadn't done anything about it. So she decided to move back into the house and have George there too. Deep down, she knew she and George were an unlikely couple. She didn't understand why he liked her so much. Even if she thought she was someone he wanted, he could probably be with anyone he wanted. Ultimately, she wanted to get Bill back, for good. She believed she could eventually control her desire for charming guys. She thought of it as just a phase. Once she had Bill back, she figured she could move on. But maybe not all at once. She made some long-term plans. Thoughts swirled around for a few months. The divorce hearing was in 2 weeks. Rose didn't mind the divorce, so she let it happen. The Saturday after it was finalized, Mary and Rose met at the pool. Rose was renting from Bill while looking for a new place. Bill was hiking, and George was playing tennis. Rose asked Mary, "Do you like George? You know, in a romantic way?" "Of course, why do you ask? Would you consider switching partners for a night? You would trade George for Bill? I mean, Bill is nice and all, but it would just be for one night. Maybe a weekend. I'm missing how Bill used to listen to me." "How far have you gone with him?" I asked. Mary. Mary looked back at me. "Pretty far." "Does he help with cooking and cleaning?" "Yes, but there's a catch. He won't want to see you anymore. You chose someone else, and he's happy with what he has now." "I had my reasons. I thought maybe he would come back to me. I get what you mean about him. I've learned a lot." And now you and George are here at the pool? That doesn't seem like you want him back. You let the divorce happen. Mary, I don't think you want him for real. I just want my old Bill back. I'm willing to let you have George. That's not possible, Rose. He cares about you too much. Have you two come over next weekend? I'll send George to you. You move in on him. I've noticed how he looks at you. Maybe he does like me, but you have history with him, don't you? I was confused. We visited his family in Denver. His Aunt Beth looks like me. We're the same age, too. When we got back, I pushed him to talk. She had a moment with him, long ago. It was important to him. Well, I don't look like you or her. Mary, you're younger and just as attractive. If you play it right, he might want a future with you. And you think that would bring Bill back to you? Maybe. I think he might be more open to me now that we're divorced. There are no promises left anymore. The next weekend, Mary invited Bill over to the pool house where he still had some things. He was okay with George and Rose living there. After all, they were paying rent. Mary had made quite the impression at his work during the holiday party, so he wasn't bothered by George being with Rose. Everyone seemed to accept it. Now he was coming over for a casual gathering at the pool. The warm weather was back. All week he felt anxious about it. Mary seemed different. He had no trust in anyone, even her. He thought about their relationship and realized he didn't want a new family. He still cared about her in a way, but it wasn't like the love he had for Rose. That thought was hard for him, especially since he felt lost too. Mary made things feel okay for now. But now he had a bad feeling. He had left his weapon locked away in the pool house. When they arrived at the pool house, Mary told Bill to get ready. He hesitated at first, but she was firm. He complied. As he prepared, he felt a sense of nervousness. It was hard to shake the idea that he was doing this for her, even if he didn't want to. That was just part of how he was. Bill looked out at the pool. George was relaxing there. He knew what Mary planned, so he wasn't surprised when she came out with him. Bill stood there naked while Mary lounged in a light sheer pool wrap. She sat near George, who was clearly watching her, but she didn't acknowledge Bill at all. Mary glanced at Bill. "Go help Rose in the kitchen," she said casually. Bill understood what was going on. He looked at Mary, who simply smiled and waved him away as if shooing him. With a sigh, Bill walked inside. Rose was waiting in the kitchen. She didn't know if Bill would actually leave Mary with George and come to her, but there he was, clearly vulnerable. Rose was dressed in a simple halter top and loose shorts, barefoot. She smiled as he entered. "Bill," she said, "George is with your girlfriend, and now you're with me." Without waiting for a response, Rose took his hand and led him upstairs to the master bedroom. She pushed him onto the bed. "Just like old times," she murmured. Bill said nothing as Rose settled beside him. It had been a long time since they had been together like this, and the familiarity of it was overwhelming. They spent the next few hours together, losing track of time as they rekindled something that had been lost for months. Meanwhile, outside, Mary noticed Rose leading Bill away. She got up, dropped her pool wrap, and headed toward the pool house. George followed her inside. "I hope you can live up to what I've heard," she teased. George laughed confidently, knowing he would, and the two of them spent their time together, enjoying each other's company. Mary had heard Rose praise George before, and now she understood why. He was everything Rose had described, and more. Back in the main house, Rose and Bill spent hours reconnecting. It was both exhausting and freeing for them. Rose didn't try to control the situation too much, which Bill appreciated when he thought about it later. They were simply together, and that was enough for now. Meanwhile, Mary and George spent just as much time together, moving from the futon to other pieces of furniture. In their enthusiasm, they even managed to break a coffee table. Later, after they had both exhausted themselves, Mary left George to rest and headed back into the kitchen, hungry. She found the leftovers Rose had prepared earlier, sloppy joes, buns, and coleslaw, and made herself a plate. As she was eating, Rose joined her, also grabbing a plate. Mary looked at her and laughed. "Is Bill still conscious?" Rose grinned. "Barely. What about George?" Mary shook her head. "He's out for now, but I think he'll make it." Bill eventually came out of the bedroom, clearly tired but famished. He grabbed a plate and joined the women, still recovering from the long evening. A few moments later, George appeared, also looking a bit drained but in good spirits. Bill glanced at him and couldn't help but think, asterisk. No wonder these two couldn't resist him. He started to say something but stopped himself. What was the point? Instead, he simply said, "George, you should grab some food." George nodded and walked toward the kitchen, and the group continued their quiet meal. Rose felt more comfortable around him. Bill observed how the women looked at George. He thought Mary seemed distracted, but Rose seemed open to connection. He had read that divorced women were often looking for companionship. Rose was divorced. The three of them watched as George returned with a plate of food. He sat down quickly and ate a lot. He then looked at Rose and asked, "Dessert?" She stood up and went inside. A few minutes later, she came back with a chilled chocolate cake and cream cheese frosting. She brought plates, cut the cake, and served it. Bill thought she looked wonderful while doing it. As she handed him his slice, he noticed Rose looking at him, and Mary too. But George was focused on his dessert. As they ate, the women kept glancing at Bill. George decided to have another slice of cake. After finishing their pieces, Mary and Rose exchanged looks. Bill watched them. Rose got up and pointed at Bill, then at herself. Mary nodded in agreement. Rose led Bill inside. Mary turned to George after he finished his second piece and asked, "Want another slice?" She smiled as she said it. George replied, "Sure." They went back to the living room and Mary closed the sliding door behind them. The next morning, after Rose took a shower, she and Bill shared a moment together. She had some things in mind, wanting to find a balance in their relationship. Bill was happy to please her and wanted to understand his own feelings. Bill made breakfast with eggs and bacon. They were all quite hungry. Then George said, "This has all been nice, hasn't it? Right, Bill?" Bill sensed George was a bit nervous. He reflected on the fact that George had been close to both his ex-wife and his new girlfriend. He decided to keep things interesting. He thought about his own wants, too. With a smile, Bill replied, "I had a good time." His tone was calm, and he looked at George with a serious expression. George nodded, while the women listened closely, curious about their exchange. Rose asked, "So, where do we all stand now? How will this work?" Mary added, "Yes, we're all curious." In that moment, they realized that despite any uncertainties, it was Bill who seemed to have a guiding influence. He turned to Mary and said, "I care about you, Mary, but do you want to have kids someday?" "Yes, I really do," she replied eagerly. Bill then looked at George. "What about you?" "Yes, I do too," George said, glancing at Mary, who smiled back. Mary asked, "And you, Bill?" "I've experienced that before. It was good for a while." Rose laughed lightly. "You seemed to enjoy yourself last night." Bill smiled and said, "That's true, Rose. Even with all my thoughts, we can discuss this later." Then he turned to Mary and George, ready to continue the conversation. All four of them were gathered by the pool. Mary glanced at George, and Bill couldn't help but notice how George carried himself confidently. Bill decided to break the silence. "Mary, why don't you and George spend some time together? See how things might work between you. You haven't had much of a chance to really know each other outside of, well, certain encounters." Mary smiled at Bill. "I'll always care about you, Billy. George can't be the same to me as you are, but I've been thinking about how things might work long term." Bill nodded. "I used to think George was a bit of a jerk, always chasing women even after my wife. But now I think he'd settle down for you. You two should explore it. Because to be honest, I'm not sure we can keep going the way we've been without both of us eventually wanting more from someone else." Mary looked at George, then said playfully, "All right, big guy, let's go see what's next for us." She led him into the pool house, and soon after there was a loud thud, followed by a soft, "Oof!" from George, causing Rose to burst into laughter. Rose turned to Bill, grinning. "Well, seems like George is taken for now. What about us, Bill? You just gave Mary away." Bill looked at her seriously. "I think it's time we figure out a way forward, Rose. We've both had our wild moments." Rose shrugged. "I won't deny it. I've let that side of me out, but you've benefited from it too." "Yeah," Bill agreed. I've enjoyed my time with Mary and others, but I think it's time to move on. I forgive you for everything. We've both had our fun." Rose smiled, but there was a glint of mischief in her eyes. "Well, you're no George, but I guess you'll do. He was a bit messy anyway and didn't help around the house. Plus, you're a lot smarter." Bill laughed. "So, if you had to choose one night with me or George?" "Him, obviously," Rose teased. "But George is taken now. And if I'm being honest, I'd pick you over those gym guys any day." "Fair enough," Bill said, laughing. Rose stood up and pointed toward the kitchen. "Now get to work. Time to clean up the kitchen." "Yes, Rose," Bill replied, getting up to do his chores with a smile. Rose playfully slapped him on the back as he went to wash the dishes. Hash, hash, hash. 1 year later, a year had passed, and Rose was dressed to impress as she walked down the aisle. Bill followed behind her, wearing a sharp suit. They took their seats in the front row, ready to witness the wedding. Soft music filled the room as Mary walked down the aisle, escorted by her father. She looked radiant in her wedding gown, glowing with happiness. George, standing at the altar in a traditional tux, watched her with admiration, his hair tied back neatly. Mary glanced at Bill and Rose as she passed, smiling warmly at them. She was filled with joy, but also held on to a small, secret memory. The night before the wedding, she had visited Bill at the pool house. Rose had known about it and gave her blessing just this once. That morning, Mary had said her quiet goodbye to Bill in her own way, a fond memory that would remain just between the three of them. Now, as she walked toward her future with George, she was ready to begin a new chapter, leaving the past behind. The ceremony continued, but the unspoken understanding between them all remained. Life had moved on, and so had they. They still had a way of understanding each other without words, as they always had before. After they lay quietly for a moment, Mary whispered to Bill, "It's kind of exciting to think I'll still carry a part of you with me when I say my vows." Bill smiled and kissed her gently. "This was special, Mary. If things don't work out with George, you know you can always come back here." Mary nodded. "I know." The wedding ceremony took place just after 2 in the afternoon. George made his vows in the traditional way, pledging to love, honor, and stay faithful. Mary promised to love and support him, with a slightly different phrasing, something that didn't go unnoticed by Bill and Rose, though George didn't seem to pick up on it. His mother noticed the difference, while his father seemed more distracted. Focusing on the bride and bridesmaids. At the reception, everyone mingled and danced. George danced with Rose twice, each time being polite and respectful. His father, on the other hand, danced with Mary, Rose, and a couple of bridesmaids, holding them a little too close for comfort, though it wasn't inappropriate enough to cause any complaints. Bill spent most of the evening dancing with Rose, but he shared 2 dances with Mary as well. He was respectful, though as the last dance drew to a close, Mary leaned in and whispered, "You're still a part of my life, Billy. I can feel it." The next morning, Mary and George left for their honeymoon in the Bahamas. When Rose and Bill returned to his house after the reception, Rose eyed him with a teasing look. "I saw how you were dancing with her," she said, half-jokingly. "Now get out of those clothes." Bill grinned. "Yes, Rose," he said, and began to undress. Rose sat in her favorite chair, watching him. She patted her lap once he was done. Bill, knowing what was expected, lay across her lap as she requested. Rose gave him a few firm pats, just enough to show she was in control. Bill squirmed slightly, but remained there, clearly affected. Afterward, Rose stood up and led him upstairs, a sense of satisfaction in the air as they left the evening behind them. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.